Hi, I'm Lisa Carter. I'm the Common Core Instructional Specialist for Kershaw County School District, and I've been charged with the task of preparing us to bridge the South Carolina standards, the Common Core standards, in preparation for full implementation of the Common Core standards in the year 2014. In preparing for my job, I have participated in webinars and conferences and read literature and done some research online, and have come up with the same conclusion that we must begin at the end, and that's assessment. Specifically, Webb's depth of knowledge. For those of you who are not familiar with Webb's depth of knowledge, it is very different from Bloom's taxonomy. While Bloom's looks at levels and higher order thinking, Bloom's does not look at depth, and that's what Webb's depth of knowledge does. It looks deeper. And where Bloom's, you would look at the verb, and the verb would determine the level with which you were instructing or assessing. Webb's depth of knowledge is about what follows that verb. So let me give you an example of that. We're going to look at the verb describe in 3 different ways. The first one is describe 3 characteristics of a metamorphic rock. This is simply depth of knowledge 1 because they are only required to recall the information. Describe the difference between metamorphic and igneous rocks. This is depth of knowledge 2 because it is requiring some more cognitive processing than the first one. They have to not only know the characteristics of the 2 different kinds of rocks, but then they have to tell what the differences are between the 2. Then describe a model that you might use to represent the relationships that exist in a rock cycle. This is depth of knowledge 3 because it requires a deep understanding of rocks, of their relationships with one another, and then how can that student represent it in a model so that it is demonstrating their understanding of the rocks and their relationships within the rock cycle. So here we have one verb, and it's written with different following expectations. These are the intended learning standards. These are the objectives the students are going to describe in all of these, but what follows it is what is the depth. When we think about depth of knowledge, we are not thinking about difficulty. We are looking more at complexity. It is not about being harder, it is about being more complex. So, for example, a difficult question might be, well, first of all, you might ask your students, who knows the definition for exaggerate? Many of your students might know that. Then you might say, who knows the definition for ostentatious? Probably nobody's going to know that. Or if they do, it is simply because they're recalling it. So that's, while it's difficult, it's hard for some students, it's not complex. Example for math is the same thing. If you are adding 2 numbers, that's depth of knowledge 1. You go on to add 2 numbers that are larger, it is more difficult, but it is not complex. When we're looking at complexity, we need to remember that the intended student learning outcome determines the depth of knowledge. So whatever you want the student to know at the end of your lesson, the week, the unit, on the test, that's going to determine their depth of knowledge. So we have to know those standards, and we have to know at what level those standards should be instructed and assessed. So we need to remember that instruction and assessment must reflect depth of knowledge of the objective or the intended learning outcome. With depth of knowledge, Webb's depth of knowledge, you've got to look at each standard and then how you're teaching it. And what is the expected outcome? That's why we have to begin at the end. We have to know what the outcome is before we can begin teaching our students. We can't teach them the Common Core standards if we don't know what is going to be expected of them. So you've got to understand those standards. Start with assessing, start with being very familiar with Webb's depth of knowledge and with the complexity with which you need to instruct and assess. It's time for us to not think outside the box, but get out of the box. And we need to have a completely different mindset when it comes to assessment, when it comes to instruction. When we do that, then we will ensure that our students are prepared for smarter balance, and not even the test, but what the true mission of Common Core Standards is that they are career or college ready. Thank you.